My daughter-in-law's voice cut through the mahogany-scented air like a blade through silk. "You're not on the deed, August. You never were." The words hung there, suspended in the crystalline tension of Patterson and Associates' boardroom, where $64 million waited to change hands like a patient predator. Outside, Seattle's December rain drummed against floor-to-ceiling windows, each droplet a tiny percussion in the symphony of my humiliation. Richard Patterson, our realtor, a man whose smile cost more than most people's cars, froze mid-gesture, his Mont-Blanc pen hovering above the signature line like a vulture circling carrion. His eyes darted between my son David and my daughter-in-law Maggie, searching for some social compass in this suddenly stormy sea. If you feel like this story might reach you somehow, follow the channel. That way, you help me bring more stories like this, and we grow with every life we learn from. Ready to sign? Patterson had asked me directly, professionally, as if I belonged there. That was his mistake. Maggie's manicured hand, those nails painted the color of dried blood, shot out and shoved me. Not gently, not accidentally. The cold marble floor rushed up to meet my palms as I caught myself, my 74-year-old knees protesting with sharp, bright pain. The sound of my body hitting the ground echoed through the room like a gunshot in a cathedral. 64 million? Her laugh was glass-breaking. Are you delusional, old man? Or should I just have you committed right now? Nursing home or psychiatric ward, your choice. My leather briefcase hit the floor with a hollow thud. Its contents, documents, photographs, truth spilling across the pristine marble like scattered bones. The sound reverberated through the room, each echo a countdown to something they couldn't yet imagine. Every pair of eyes in that room burned into me, not with concern, not with shock, with the peculiar heat of embarrassment that comes from witnessing someone else's destruction and doing nothing to stop it. The voyeurism of the comfortable, watching someone else's world collapse. Sarah Chun, the estate attorney, shifted in her Italian leather chair, her $1,000 suit rustling like autumn leaves. Marcus Webb, the primary investor, studied his Rolex as if time itself had become suddenly fascinating. Linda Morrison, our mortgage broker, found her smartphone screen utterly captivating. Nobody moved to help me up. I pushed myself to my feet slowly, deliberately, straightening my wool coat with the same precision I'd used to iron it that morning. My son David, my blood, my legacy. My greatest disappointment turned from his conversation with the mortgage team just enough to look at me without actually seeing me. Dad. His voice carried all the warmth of a winter grave. You're too old to understand real estate at this level. Stop embarrassing yourself. Stop embarrassing yourself. The words settled into my chest like stones into still water, creating ripples that would soon become tsunamis. But I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, could be sharper than any blade. Maggie approached me again, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Her smile was practiced perfection, the kind that graced charity galas and corporate parties. Beautiful and utterly hollow. Let me make this clear, August. Each word was enunciated with surgical precision. You are nothing more than a tenant in our home, a guest who's overstayed his welcome. And I swear on my grandmother's grave, you will never set foot in that estate once the papers are signed. The scrape of my chair being dragged across the floor was like nails on a chalkboard, deliberate and degrading. She positioned it in the far corner, away from the warm afternoon light that poured through those magnificent windows, away from the table where decisions were made and futures were forged. Sit, she commanded, as if I were a disobedient dog. I walked to that corner with measured steps, each footfall a drumbeat in my own funeral march. I placed my briefcase gently beside me. Those scattered documents could wait, and folded my hands in my lap with the dignity of a man who had nothing left to lose. From my exile in the shadows, I had a perfect view of everything. The contract lay spread across the conference table like a treasure map, its cream-colored pages edged with gold paperclips, each one holding the weight of what they believed was their victory. I could see their faces too. David's sharp focus, Maggie's triumphant smirk, Patterson's nervous energy as he tried to pretend this was all perfectly normal. The realtor cleared his throat, the practiced sound of a man accustomed to smoothing over awkward moments. Well then, shall we proceed with the closing procedures? Pens began their deadly dance across paper. Signatures flowed like blood on the parchment. Chairs shifted. Water glasses were sipped. The machinery of wealth transfer moved forward with the inexorable momentum of a falling avalanche. Life continued as if I had simply ceased to exist, but I was still there, still watching, still breathing, still planning. Every few minutes, someone would glance my way, quick, guilty looks before their eyes darted away like startled birds. It was as if acknowledging me might shatter the delicate illusion of civility they were all desperately maintaining. Their words replayed in my mind like a broken record. 64 million ... delusional ... nursing home, psychiatric ward, tenant ... never set foot. Each phrase settled deep inside me, not as fresh wounds, but as kindling for a fire that had been smoldering for years. They thought their cruelty was sharp enough to break me. What they didn't understand was that I had survived sharper words than theirs, colder betrayals, deeper cuts. I kept my face calm, my breathing even, my posture straight. To them, I must have looked like what I was supposed to be, a relic, quiet, harmless, irrelevant, a 74-year-old man who'd outlived his usefulness and was finally being put in his place. They had no idea that silence could be the deadliest weapon of all, that patience could be more dangerous than rage, that an old man with nothing left to lose could be the most dangerous creature in any room. So I sat there, half in shadow, letting them believe what they needed to believe. Let them think they'd succeeded in pushing me aside. Let them believe that the chair in the corner meant defeat. I knew something they didn't know, something that would turn this beautiful December afternoon into the last day they'd ever feel safe in their stolen paradise. And as their pens scratched across the final pages of what they thought was my obituary, I smiled. Just barely. Just enough for me. Not enough for anyone else to see. But it was there. Cold and patient and absolutely certain. Chapter 2. The history. They say the deepest wounds are the ones that never bleed. Mine were the kind carved slowly, methodically, over years of small cuts and calculated cruelties that everyone else would dismiss as nothing. But I remembered every single one. My name is August Rope, though most people call me Gus. I was born in a gray fishing town on the Oregon coast, where the Pacific Ocean taught me that patience and persistence could wear down even the hardest stone. I spent 74 years working hard, keeping quiet, and minding my own business. But quiet doesn't mean weak. And today, sitting in this glass tower while they carved up my life like a holiday turkey, I was anything but weak. The first crack in my foundation came 3 years ago, at David's birthday party. I'd spent weeks planning it, calling his old friends, arranging catering, decorating the house with photographs from his childhood. When the doorbell rang and Maggie's socialite friends arrived in their designer dresses and practiced smiles, I expected a simple introduction. Perhaps as David's father, maybe even as the man who'd built the software company they were all trying to buy pieces of. Instead, Maggie gestured toward me with her champagne flute and announced brightly, "This is our live-in handyman, Gus. He's been with the family for years." Her friends laughed politely, thinking it was some kind of inside joke, but she never corrected them. I stood there holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres I'd prepared myself, smoked salmon on handmade crackers, the recipe my late wife Eleanor had perfected, while something cold and permanent settled in my chest. Our live-in handyman. The humiliation burned, but what cut deeper was David's silence. My son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, to throw a curveball, to write his first line of code, stood there, sipping his imported beer, and said nothing. Not a word of correction. Not even a flicker of discomfort. That was when I understood. This wasn't an accident. This was policy. The indignities multiplied like cancer cells. There was my vegetable garden rows of heritage tomatoes, pepper plants, and herbs I'd been cultivating since before they moved into what used to be my house. One morning, I found the compost bin overflowing with perfectly good vegetables. When I questioned it, Maggie shrugged with the casual cruelty of someone discarding an old newspaper. "They're not certified organic like the store-bought ones," she said, examining her manicure. I don't trust what you grow in that dirt. That dirt, the soil I'd enriched for decades. The earth where Eleanor and I had planted our first garden as newlyweds, where David had learned to distinguish between weeds and wildflowers. Reduced to dirt by a woman who'd never grown anything except her bank account. Then came the locked rooms. First, it was Eleanor's sewing room. We need the space for Maggie's yoga studio. Then my workshop in the basement. The investors need somewhere private to meet. Finally, the study where I'd built my first software algorithms, where the patents that made David's fortune were conceived and born. This will make a perfect nursery someday. Each lock was a small death. Each casual dismissal, another nail in the coffin of my relevance. But the cruelest cut came last month, during Thanksgiving dinner. The table was set with Eleanor's good china, bespoke Christmas tree patterns she'd collected piece by piece over 40 years of marriage. Maggie had insisted on using it, claimed it was more festive than their usual dinnerware. Halfway through the meal, as I was telling a story about David's first programming competition, Maggie interrupted with that bright, poisonous smile. "August, would you mind eating in the kitchen? We're expecting some important guests for dessert." And she paused, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. Well, you understand. I understood perfectly. I wasn't family. I was staff. David didn't even look up from his plate. I took my turkey and stuffing to the kitchen, sat on the metal stool by the service counter, and listened to them laugh in the dining room. The sound filtering through the door like music from a party I wasn't invited to. Eleanor's china clinked against the mahogany table she'd inherited from her grandmother, while I ate alone surrounded by dirty pots and the lingering smell of cooking grease. That night, I lay in the guest room, my former master bedroom, now reduced to a space barely larger than a closet, and made a decision. Not the decision they were expecting. Not suicide or surrender or any of the pathetic options they'd probably prefer. I decided to become dangerous. Chapter 3. The weapon, the irony, was exquisite. They thought my decades in software development had made me obsolete, a relic from the era of punch cards and Fortran. What they didn't realize was that I'd been adapting, evolving, learning new systems while they were still trying to figure out how to use their smartphones without calling tech support. While David built his fortune on the gaming applications, I'd architected my algorithms, my logic trees, my mathematical models. I'd been quietly building something else, something they'd never see coming because they'd never bothered to look. It started small, a few stock trades here and there, using investment principles I'd learned during my 40 years at Boeing before the software company took off. Nothing flashy, nothing that would trigger attention. Just a 70-year-old man learning to day trade from his laptop. But small became substantial. Substantial became significant. And significant became the kind of wealth that could buy and sell David's precious gaming empire 3 times over. The cryptocurrency revolution had been particularly kind to me. While most people my age were afraid of digital currencies, I understood the underlying blockchain technology better than most computer science graduates. I'd been mining Bitcoin when it was worth pennies, trading Ethereum before most people could pronounce it. By the time David and Maggie started their campaign to push me out, I owned more cryptocurrency than some small country's GDP. But that wasn't enough. Revenge required more than money. It required precision. So I bought stocks. Specifically, I bought stocks in every company that held mortgage, insurance policies, or business loans connected to David's empire. I bought shares in the banks that financed his operations, the venture capital firms that had invested in his startups, even the real estate investment trusts that owned the buildings where his companies operated. I became, without anyone's knowledge, one of the largest individual shareholders in the ecosystem that supported my son's success. Not controlling shares, that would have triggered disclosure requirements, but enough to have influence, enough to make phone calls, enough to ask pointed questions during shareholder meetings. Questions like, are we confident in the long-term stability of these gaming company investments? Or, have we thoroughly vetted the management structures of our borrowers? Or my personal favorite, what happens to our position if key intellectual property rights are challenged? Because that was the nuclear option I'd been preparing for 3 years. The patents that formed the foundation of David's gaming empire. The core algorithms that made his companies profitable weren't actually his. They were mine. Oh, the lawyers had been clever when they structured the original agreements. My name was buried in technical documentation, listed as contributing developer or consulting architect. David's name was on the primary patents as lead inventor, but I've been very, very careful about keeping detailed records of my work. Notes, emails, development logs, the kind of documentation that software engineers create out of habit and lawyers use to destroy careers. Every algorithm David claimed to have invented, I could prove I'd actually written. Every breakthrough innovation his companies had monetized traced back to code I developed in my basement workshop, the same workshop they'd locked me out of to make room for investor meetings. The beautiful thing about intellectual property law is that it doesn't care about family relationships. It doesn't care about hurt feelings or wounded pride. It only cares about who can prove they created what, when, and how. And I could prove everything. The documentation was already filed with my attorney, not some small-town lawyer, but Harrison, Kim & Associates, the same prestigious firm that had handled patent disputes for Microsoft and Apple. The cease and desist letters were already drafted. The injunctions were ready to file. One phone call from me, and David's entire empire would grind to a halt while the court sorted out who really owned the technology that made it all possible. His investors would panic. His contracts would be voided. His IPO, the one Maggie kept bragging about to her friends, would evaporate like morning mist. But that still wasn't enough. Money and legal warfare were just tools. What I really wanted was something more personal, more poetic. I wanted them to understand, in the deepest possible way, what it felt like to lose everything while being completely powerless to stop it. Chapter 4. The closing continued with its careful choreography of greed and paperwork. Signatures flowed across documents like blood across bandages. Richard Patterson's voice maintained its professional smoothness, but I could see the perspiration beginning to gather at his temples. He was a good realtor, good enough to sense when a deal was about to go sideways, even if he couldn't identify the source of the danger. And here we have the final transfer documents, he announced, sliding a thick folder toward David and Maggie. Once these are signed, the Mercer Island estate will be officially yours. The Mercer Island estate. Even the name was pretentious. It had been the house when Eleanor and I built it 30 years ago, back when Mercer Island was just another Seattle suburb instead of a playground for tech millionaires. We designed every room, chosen every fixture, planted every tree in the yard. It was where David had taken his first steps, where he built his first computer program on an ancient Apple IE, where Eleanor had taken her last breath. Now it was real estate, a commodity, a $64 million trophy for a woman who measured her worth in square footage and a son who'd forgotten where he came from. The property includes all fixtures, landscaping, and ... Patterson paused, consulting his notes. The 3-car garage, wine cellar, home theater, and fully equipped workshop in the basement level, my workshop, where I'd created the algorithms that made David rich, where I taught him to think like an engineer instead of just a user, where the patents that could destroy his empire had been born. That's perfect, Maggie purred, her pen poised over the signature line. We're planning to convert that workspace into a luxury spa, hot stones, aromatherapy, the full experience. A spa. My life's work would become a place for wealthy women to get their chakras aligned. The poetry was almost too perfect. I watched David sign his name with a flourish, his signature bold and confident. The signature of a man who believed he was claiming his birthright instead of signing his own death warrant. Maggie followed suit, her careful penmanship as precise and cold as everything else about her. Congratulations, Patterson said, his relief evident. You are now the proud owners of one of Mercer Island's most prestigious properties. Champagne appeared as if by magic Dom Perignon, because of course it was. Crystal flutes were distributed to everyone except me. I remained in my corner, watching the celebration unfold like a wake for my own relevance. To new beginnings, David raised his glass, finally acknowledging my presence with a glance that lasted exactly long enough to be insulting. And to ... moving forward, without me. without the man who'd given him life, education, opportunity, and the intellectual foundation for everything he'd achieved. They drank their champagne and laughed their victorious laughs while I sat in the shadows, forgotten and dismissed. But I wasn't forgotten. I was waiting, because they'd made one crucial mistake in their haste to humiliate me. In their eagerness to push me aside and claim their prize, they'd overlooked a single critical detail. The $64 million estate they'd just purchased, the crown jewel of their real estate empire. I still owned it. Not on paper. The deed transfer was legitimate. The contracts properly executed. But ownership, real ownership, goes deeper than legal documents. It lives in the foundation, in the walls, in the very bones of a place. And I'd built those bones with more than just concrete and steel. 3 months ago, when I realized what they were planning, I'd made some modifications to the house. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would show up in inspections. Just a few small upgrades to the smart home system I'd installed years earlier. The beauty of being a software architect is that you understand systems from the inside out. You know where the vulnerabilities are, where the backdoors can be hidden, how to build in features that won't be discovered until it's too late. The house they just bought was equipped with state-of-the-art automation, climate control, security systems, lighting, even the wine cellar temperature, everything connected to a central network that could be controlled remotely. What they didn't know was that I'd hard-coded my own access into every system. Not the kind of access that would show up in user manuals or help files. Deep access. Root-level privileges that couldn't be changed or deleted without rebuilding the entire network from scratch. I could turn off their heat in January, lock them out of their own home, make their security system think there were intruders in every room, turn their smart TVs into surveillance monitors, make their refrigerator order nothing but cat food for the next 6 months. But that was just the beginning. The real masterpiece was what I'd done to the financial systems. David's companies were completely dependent on cloud-based operations. Servers, databases, customer management systems, everything running on infrastructure that I'd helped design and implement. Infrastructure that included very subtle backdoors that only I knew about. With a few keystrokes, I could introduce glitches into his systems. Nothing traceable, nothing that would look like sabotage. Just the kind of mysterious technical problems that plague software companies and make investors nervous. Database corruptions, server crashes, security vulnerabilities that would require complete system rebuilds. The kind of problems that could cost millions to fix and destroy confidence in a company's competence. But even that wasn't the endgame. That was just softening the target. The real weapon was already in motion. Chapter 5. The reckoning. My phone buzzed against my leg. A text message that had been 3 years in the making. I pulled it out discreetly, keeping my face neutral as I read the words that would change everything. Initial filing complete. Patent challenges submitted to USPTO. Press release ready for distribution. Awaiting your confirmation to proceed. Harrison, Kim and Associates. The legal firm that specialized in intellectual property warfare. The same firm that had helped David navigate his original patent applications, ironically enough. They'd been very interested when I approached them with evidence that those applications might have been ... incomplete in their attribution of true authorship. I looked up from my phone to see David signing the final document, his signature bold and confident. Maggie was already planning their celebration dinner, something about finally having our own space, where they wouldn't have to accommodate certain ... outdated ... household arrangements. She meant me, of course, the inconvenient old man who'd been cluttering up their perfect life. In exactly 90 seconds, I was going to show them what inconvenient really looked like. I typed back a single word, proceed. The phone buzzed again almost immediately, then again, then a third time. Harrison's team was efficient, I'd give them that. The cease and desist letters were being delivered to David's companies simultaneously. The patent challenges were being filed with the USPTO. The press release was being distributed to every major tech publication and financial news outlet. Within the next hour, David's world would begin its carefully orchestrated collapse. But first, I wanted to watch him celebrate. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up from my corner chair. Every head in the room turned toward me with varying degrees of surprise and annoyance. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Patterson looked up from his paperwork, his professional smile flickering with uncertainty. Mr. Rope, is there something we can help you with? Oh, I think there's quite a lot you can help me with, I said, walking slowly toward the conference table. You see, I've been sitting over there, listening to all this talk about ownership and property rights. I realized we might want to double-check a few things before everyone starts spending their money. Maggie's laugh was sharp and dismissive. August, please. Don't embarrass yourself any more than you already have. The sale is final. The papers are signed. You have no legal standing here. No legal standing, I repeated thoughtfully, as if trying the phrase on for size. That's interesting. Richard, you mentioned the house includes all the fixtures and equipment, correct? Including the basement workshop? That's correct, Patterson said cautiously. And all the intellectual property created in that workshop would naturally transfer with the property. David's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. His face began to change as he read the messages, color draining from his cheeks like water from a broken dam. Dad, he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. What did you do? I smiled then. Really smiled. For the first time in 3 years. The kind of smile that came from watching decades of careful planning finally come to fruition. I did what you taught me to do, son. I adapted to changing market conditions. Maggie's phone was buzzing now, too. Then Sarah Chun's. Then Marcus Webb's. A symphony of digital notifications, each one carrying the same devastating news. David's gaming empire was being challenged on fundamental intellectual property grounds. This is impossible, David said, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Those patents are mine. I invented those algorithms. Did you? I asked mildly, because I have 30 years of documentation that suggests otherwise. Development notes, email chains, even video recordings of me explaining the core concepts to you when you were still in college. The color had completely drained from David's face now. Maggie was scrolling through her phone frantically, her perfectly composed mask finally beginning to crack. The Bloomberg article just went live, Marcus Webb announced quietly, reading from his own phone. Rope Gaming Technologies faces major patent dispute. Founding CEO's intellectual property rights questioned. Trading halted pending investigation. Trading halted, I repeated thoughtfully. That's unfortunate, especially right before the IPO. Maggie looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with something approaching panic. You can't do this. You don't have the money for this kind of legal battle, don't I? I pulled out my own phone and opened my portfolio app, the one that tracked my cryptocurrency holdings, my stock positions, my real estate investments. The app that showed a net worth that dwarfed everything David had ever accomplished. I turned the screen toward her so she could see the numbers. 8 figures, 9 in some accounts. More money than they'd see in their lifetimes, all accumulated quietly while they were busy treating me like hired help. You see, Maggie, while you were planning yoga studios and spa conversions, I was doing what I've always done. I was building, creating, planning for the future. I put the phone away. The difference is, I was planning for a future that doesn't include either of you. Patterson was frantically shuffling through papers now, looking for some escape clause or legal protection. Mr. Rope, these allegations, if they're substantiated, it could impact the property sale. Oh, Richard, the property sale is the least of anyone's worries now. I gestured toward the windows, where Seattle's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. You see, I own significant positions in most of the companies that finance David's operations. Banks, venture capital firms, real estate investment trusts. Amazing how much influence a major shareholder can have when they start asking uncomfortable questions. David's phone rang, then rang again. His lawyers, probably. His investors, certainly. His board of directors, definitely. All of them with the same urgent question. How had they missed this? How had they failed to verify the most basic intellectual property claims? This is business suicide, David whispered. If you destroy my companies, you destroy your own legacy. Everything we built together. We didn't build anything together, son. I built it. You claimed it. There's a difference. I walked back toward my corner chair, but I didn't sit down. Instead, I picked up my briefcase, the one Maggie had dismissed so casually, and opened it. Inside were the documents they should have seen coming. Patent applications with my name as primary inventor. Development logs going back 15 years. Email chains where David asked me technical questions about his algorithms. Video files of me explaining core programming concepts to him when he was still struggling with basic coding principles. But most importantly, there was a single legal document that would end this conversation once and for all. This, I said, holding up the paper, is a court order freezing all assets related to rope gaming technologies pending resolution of intellectual property disputes. That includes personal assets purchased with potentially illegitimate funds. I watched understanding dawn in Maggie's eyes like a sunrise in hell. The house, she breathed. The house. The cars. The investment accounts. The vacation properties. Everything purchased with money that legally belongs to me. I folded the document carefully and put it back in my briefcase. Amazing how quickly ownership can change when you have proper documentation. Chapter 6. The checkmate. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the rain outside seemed to have paused, as if nature itself was holding its breath to see how this would end. David was staring at his phone like it might spontaneously combust. Maggie had gone completely white, her champagne flute forgotten in her manicured hand. Patterson looked like a man who just realized he was standing in a minefield. "You planned this," David said finally, his voice hollow. "All of it. The humiliation, the corner chair, letting us sign the papers. I planned everything," I confirmed. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Maggie found her voice first, though it came out as more of a snarl. "You vindictive old bastard. This is your own son, your own family." "Family?" I repeated the word like it was a foreign language. Family doesn't introduce their father as the handyman. Family doesn't lock him out of his own workshop. Family doesn't make him eat Thanksgiving dinner in the kitchen while strangers use his dead wife's china. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. David flinched with every word, but Maggie's face was hardening into something approaching hatred. "So what now?" she demanded. "You destroy David's companies out of spite? You ruin everything we've worked for because your feelings got hurt?" "Hurt feelings," I mused. "Is that what you think this is about?" I walked to the conference table where the closing documents lay scattered like battlefield casualties. The papers that had made them owners of a $64 million estate exactly 17 minutes ago. Papers that were now effectively worthless. "This isn't about hurt feelings, Maggie. This is about consequences. You see, I spent 40 years in software development, and the first thing you learn is that every action has predictable results. You write bad code, you get system crashes. You ignore security protocols, you get data breaches. You treat your family like servants." I picked up the main deed transfer document and held it up to the light. "You get exactly what you deserve." David's phone rang again. This time, he answered it, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I understand. No, I wasn't aware... How long do we have?" He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been respect or terror. At this point, the difference was academic. "The SEC is opening an investigation," he said quietly. "They want to verify the intellectual property claims before the IPO can proceed." "That could take months," Marcus Webb said, his voice hoarse. He was already calculating his losses, probably trying to figure out how to explain this to his own investors. Maybe years. "Yes," I agreed pleasantly. "It could." Maggie slammed her champagne flute down on the table, hard enough to chip the crystal. "You can't do this. There has to be some kind of statute of limitations, some way to ... double quote. To what? To retroactively steal intellectual property from the man who created it." I shook my head. "I'm afraid not. Patent law is very clear on these matters. Original authorship is original authorship, regardless of when it's challenged." Sarah Chun finally found her voice. "Mr. Rope, perhaps we could discuss some kind of settlement arrangement. A licensing agreement that would allow the companies to continue operating while what? While we pretend that theft becomes legitimate if you pay for it after the fact?" I closed my briefcase with a sharp click. "I don't think so." The room fell silent again. Outside, The Seattle skyline was beginning to light up as evening approached. Somewhere in those glass towers, David's employees were probably just learning that their company's stock options had become worthless. His investors were calculating losses. His competitors were circling like sharks. "What do you want?" David asked finally. The question came out broken, defeated. The voice of a man who just realized he was completely, utterly powerless. "What do I want?" I repeated thoughtfully. "I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything while everyone watches. I want you to know what it's like to be dismissed and discarded by the people you love most. I want you to experience the unique humiliation of having your life's work attributed to someone else." I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. "But mostly, I want you to remember this moment. Because for the next few years, while you're fighting legal battles, you can't win and trying to rebuild companies that were never really yours. You're going to have plenty of time to think about how you treated the man who gave you everything." Maggie's voice stopped me at the door. "You're destroying yourself too. You know, if David's companies fail, your own reputation." I turned to look at her one last time. The woman who'd made my life hell for 3 years. The woman who'd turned my son against me and stole my home while I watched helplessly. My reputation was built on 40 years of honest work and legitimate innovation. It will survive. But yours? I smiled that cold, patient smile again. "Well, I suppose we'll see how well you do when the money runs out." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, where the elevator waited like a chariot to carry me away from the wreckage of their carefully constructed world. Behind me, I could hear the furious whispers beginning. Damage control, blame assessment, the desperate scrambling of people who just realized they were drowning and there was no one left to save them. Epilogue. The last word 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. Purchased with cryptocurrency profits and furnished with pieces I'd selected myself. No wife's china to be dismissed. No son's girlfriend to insult my gardening. Just space, silence, and the satisfying knowledge that some stories do have happy endings. The newspaper was spread across my breakfast table. Financial section open to an article about rope gaming technology's bankruptcy filing. David's photo stared up at me from the page older, grayer, defeated. The IPO had been canceled. The patent challenges had been upheld. The company had dissolved in a cascade of legal battles and investor lawsuits. The house on Mercer Island had been seized as part of the asset freeze. David and Maggie were reportedly living in a rental apartment in Bellevue. Their fortune evaporated like morning mist. The woman who'd called me a tenant was now a tenant herself. The irony was exquisite. My phone buzzed with a text message from Harrison, Kim, and Associates. Final settlement approved. Patent ownership transferred back to August Rope. All licensing fees and damages awarded per court order. "Congratulations, Mr. Rope. Justice served. Justice served." The phrase rolled around in my mind like a fine wine on the tongue. Sweet, complex, with just the right hint of bitterness to make it memorable. I'd poured myself a cup of coffee, real coffee, not the overpriced swill they'd served at that closing meeting, and walked to my floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below me like a circuit board, all gleaming connections and flowing data streams. Somewhere out there, David was learning what it meant to start over at 45 with nothing but debt and damaged reputation. Somewhere out there, Maggie was discovering that beauty and cruelty weren't assets you could leverage indefinitely. The vindication should have felt sweeter. I'd imagined this moment for 3 years. The complete reversal of fortune. The absolute proof that patience and planning could triumph over arrogance and greed. And it was satisfying in its way. But it was also hollow, because in the end, I'd had to destroy my own son to save myself. That truth sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and indigestible. Every time I looked at David's picture in the financial pages, I saw the boy who'd fallen asleep on my shoulder during late-night programming sessions. The teenager who'd called me his hero when I'd helped him win his first coding competition. The young man who'd thanked me in his college graduation speech for teaching him that intelligence without integrity was just clever stupidity. Where had that boy gone? When had he become someone who could watch his father be humiliated and feel nothing? When had love been replaced by convenience and family bonds dissolved in the acid of social climbing? I set down my coffee and walked to the desk where I kept Eleanor's photograph. My wife of 42 years, gone now for 5, but still the moral compass I used to navigate decisions like this. She was smiling in the picture, the gentle, knowing smile that had guided me through 4 decades of marriage and parenthood. "What would you think of all this, Al?" I asked her image quietly. "Your husband, the vengeful old man. Your son, the ungrateful heir. Your daughter-in-law, the social climbing snake. Eleanor had been the forgiving one in our marriage, the peacemaker, the woman who taught David that family meant something more than shared DNA and legal obligations. If she were alive, she would have found a way to bridge this gap before it became a canyon. She would have spoken the words that might have saved us all. But Eleanor was gone, and I was alone with my victory. Alone with the knowledge that I'd chosen justice over mercy, revenge over reconciliation. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Seattle. Probably a reporter wanting a quote about the bankruptcy, or a lawyer trying to drum up business from the wreckage of David's empire. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Hello? Dad?" The voice was barely recognizable. Hoarse. Defeated. Desperate. It's David." I closed my eyes and felt something crack in my chest. Not my heart breaking, that it had months ago. This was something else. Something like the last wall of an old house finally surrendering to time and weather. "I know who it is," I said quietly. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear him breathing, could imagine him sitting somewhere cheap and unfamiliar, surrounded by the ruins of his carefully constructed life. I wanted to double quotes. His voice broke. Started again. "I needed to tell you that I know. About everything. About what I did. What we did. Do you? The way we treated you. The way I let her the way I..." He was crying now. My 45-year-old son was crying like the child he'd once been, before pride and ambition had poisoned him against love. "The way you what, David?" "The way I forgot who you were. Who we were. What you meant to me." Each word came out like a confession. "I know you'll never forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I remember now. I remember who you really are." I walked back to the window, watching the city lights blur through sudden moisture in my eyes. "And who am I, son?" "You're my father. You're the man who taught me everything I know. You're the reason I ever succeeded at anything." His voice was steady now, finding strength in truth. "And I threw it all away for money and status and a woman who never loved me the way Mom loved you." Mom. He hadn't called Eleanor Mom in years. It had been your mother, or Eleanor, or nothing at all. But now, stripped of everything else, he was remembering the words that mattered. "Where's Maggie?" I asked. A bitter laugh. "Gone. She left the day the bank froze our accounts. Said she didn't sign up to be married to a failure." Another pause. She was right, in her way. I did fail, just not how she meant. "How did you fail?" "I failed to be the man you raised me to be. I failed to honor the woman who raised me. I failed to remember that family isn't something you trade up from. It's something you protect and cherish and fight for." His voice was stronger now, more certain. "I failed to be your son." The tears came then, hot and unexpected. I'd planned for every outcome except this one. I'd prepared for continued defiance, for legal battles, for years of bitter silence. I hadn't prepared for genuine repentance. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I know what I've lost, and I know it's my own fault. But..." He took a shaky breath. "But I was wondering if maybe you might consider letting me try to earn back the right to call you my father." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window. Below me, the city hummed with 8 million stories of triumph and failure, love and loss, justice and mercy. 8 million people trying to figure out how to be human in a world that often rewarded the opposite. "David." "Yes? Do you remember what your mother used to say about second chances?" A long pause. Then, quietly, "She said God gives them to everyone, but only once. And you have to recognize them when they come, because they don't always look like what you expect." "That's right." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. She also said that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing love over anger, even when anger feels more satisfying. Dad, I'm not finished. My voice was gentle but firm. She said that families are like software programs. When there's a bug in the code, you don't throw out the whole program. You identify the problem, fix it, and run it again. Silence. Then, are you saying? I'm saying that I've been running revenge protocols for 6 months, and they've executed flawlessly. Every objective achieved. Every enemy defeated. But the program feels ... incomplete. What would make it complete? I smiled then, looking at Eleanor's photograph. She was still smiling back at me, that gentle expression that said she'd known all along how this would end. A patch, a correction to the original code, a subroutine that chooses rebuilding over destruction. I don't understand the technical metaphor, Dad, but are you saying you might be willing to try again? With me? I'm saying that your mother is probably laughing at both of us right now for taking so long to figure out what she would have solved in 5 minutes. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. I'm saying that revenge is satisfying, but forgiveness is harder. And harder usually means more worthwhile. What about the patents? The companies? The money? What about them? You're my son, not my business partner. We'll figure out the rest as we go. Another long silence. Then, I love you, Dad. I should have said that more. Should have said it when it mattered. You're saying it now. That's what matters. Would it be okay if I came to see you? I know I don't have any right to ask, but, David. Yes? Stop asking for permission to be my son. You've always been my son. Even when I wanted to forget it. Even when you wanted to forget it. I picked up Eleanor's photograph and touched the glass gently. Come home. We have 40 years of catching up to do. The line went quiet, except for the sound of my son crying. But they were different tears now. Cleaner tears. The kind that wash away old wounds instead of deepening them. Thank you, he whispered finally. Thank you for being better than I deserved. Thank you for remembering who we used to be to each other. After he hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, holding Eleanor's picture and watching the city lights reflect off the water. The financial pages lay scattered on my breakfast table, full of stories about failure and redemption, justice and consequences. But the only story that mattered was the one Eleanor had written in our hearts 47 years ago when David was born. The story about love being stronger than pride, forgiveness being more powerful than revenge, and family being the one thing you could never really lose, only temporarily misplace. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Harrison, Kim and Associates. There were new legal documents to draft, not cease and desist letters this time. Something different. Something that would transfer patent ownership not to me alone, but to a partnership. Rope and Son Technologies. The old program had run its course. Time to write new code. Time to debug the most important relationship of my life and run it again. With patches that prioritize love over logic, mercy over justice, and the future over the past. Eleanor would have been proud. Hell, I was proud. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. Thank you for staying with me and listening this far. Your attention is a gift. Did these minutes mean something to you? Then please, follow the channel. Every click from you is a push. That helps me keep bringing stories that truly stay with us.